Join me live on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern on Thursday for the final ever game of JG9 Live in our old studio before we move into a new location in the next 2 weeks. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. When we talk about the greatest and most electric receivers of the entire 1960s, there are a few men that come to mind, from the likes of Bob Hayes with the Dallas Cowboys, to Dave Parks of the San Francisco 49ers, to legends like Charlie Taylor and Raymond Berry. However, this man right here is up there with them all, the great Homer Jones. Yes, today his legacy still lives on for being the creator of the touchdown spike, popularizing what has become, without a doubt, the most popular end zone celebration of all time, to the point where it's second nature for most players nowadays, and heck, anyone who's ever played backyard football before, to get into the end zone and spike the ball. However, he was so much more than that, because the speedster truly was a heck of a receiver that in his prime could not be topped. He would run by opposing defensive backs, would master the fly route, and would find himself wide open in the end zone, being a quarterback's best friend, even if, by his own admission, and by other people's admission, he was not the best route runner, and half the time, didn't even know what route he was going to run. He was just that naturally talented and gifted. Seriously, at his peak, there were few receivers in football who were more feared and who were better than Homer Jones was. He had a whopping 10 receiving touchdowns go for 70 yards or more. Not even Jerry Rice, the all-time leader in touchdown catches and the clear-cut greatest receiver to ever play this sport, has that many. He had 19 receiving touchdowns of at least 50 yards. That's more than 4 times what Steve Largent had, and he was a first ballot Hall of Fame receiver. I mean, this guy was really, really good. He led the NFL in receiving touchdowns during the 1967 season, when he had 13, which was not only a Giants record at the time, but still is a Giants record to this day, as in the more than half-century since, only Odell Beckham Jr. in 2015 even tied that number. He not only had 3 consecutive seasons with 1,000 receiving yards, but became the first player in Giants history to have 3 seasons across that mark. For some perspective, Homer Jones did this 3 times. Every other wide receiver in Giants history, from the AFL-NFL merger until the end of the 20th century, did this 3 times combined. To date, he's the all-time leader amongst all qualified players in NFL history in yards per reception, as he ended his historic career with 22.3 yards per catch. And not only did he have 3 straight seasons from 1966 to 68, where he finished inside the top 4 of the league in receiving yards, and inside the top 3 in yards per catch, and not only made it to the Pro Bowl twice, but from 1966 to 68, no player in the NFL had more receiving yards than he did. Homer Jones was an absolute beast. As a side note, to learn more about how great Homer Jones was, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, what you might not know about Homer Jones is that his greatness almost never happened. There's a good portion of success, in life and in the NFL, that comes from being in the right place at the right time. And that definitely applied to Homer Jones. Because if it wasn't for some absolute incompetence on the part of his original team, some terrible roster management on the part of his new team, and some terrible playing by some players on his new team, none of this ever happens. The legend of Homer Jones never happens. Maybe even the popularization of the spike never happens. Because this is the story behind the crazy beginning of Homer Jones' career, and how it got him to superstardom against all odds in the first place. Before I talk about how Homer Jones became a Giants legend, and became arguably the greatest wide receiver in franchise history, we need some context to understand just how Homer Jones became a Giant in the first place. Again, like I said before, the amount of things that had to happen for Jones to have the career that he did are kind of amazing, starting with the original team that he was on. During the 1963 NFL Draft, the New York Giants selected Jones in the 20th round. However, he did not choose to initially play his professional football in the NFL. Instead, he played with the team that drafted him in the 5th round from the American Football League, the Houston Oilers. Playing for the Oilers versus the Giants made a ton of sense. The NFL was extremely defense-friendly compared to the AFL, which was very offense-friendly. The Oilers spent a higher draft pick on him and seemingly valued him more, taking him 33rd versus the Giants, who took him 278th in literally the very last round of the draft, when 20th round picks were a complete crapshoot in terms of making the roster. For some perspective, of the 14 players chosen in the 20th round in 1962, the year before, 13 of them never even played a down in professional football, with running back Amos Bullocks of the Dallas Cowboys being the lone exception. And most importantly, Homer Jones was a Texan. He was born in Texas, about 4 hours north of Houston. He went to high school in Texas, and he played his collegiate ball at Texas Southern. Why go to New York if you have the option to stay home? And when he went to Houston, he was drafted as a running back. Yeah, it seems crazy to think about that now, considering how great of a wide receiver he was with his long strides and his breakaway speed. But the Oilers drafted him as a running back, seeing as he played that position a bit while at Texas Southern. So that raises the question, why don't we view Homer Jones as the running back for the Houston Oilers? That's because of absolutely incompetent mismanagement on the part of the Oilers. You see, when Jones went to training camp for the 1963 season and the doctors did their physicals, there was something wrong with Jones's knee. According to Dr. Anthony Pisani, the team surgeon for the New York Giants, who later described the situation, the knee had 90% flexibility. It was not at 100% like it was when Jones was in college and was running a 9.3 in the 100-yard dash. This meant that Jones could not bend his knee very deep, which is kind of important for a running back who needs to make cuts. And they told Jones that he needed surgery. Naturally, when Jones heard the news, as he said, "I was under the impression I was going back for an operation." However, the Houston Oilers never returned any of his calls, nor did they ever call him. Seriously, you would think that the Oilers, seeing as they invested a 33rd overall pick into this guy and seemed to like him, would tell Jones what he needed to do in order to get back on track, and would set up a surgery, or recommend a doctor, or heck, tell him literally anything. But the Oilers just flat out ghosted him and went no contact. From all accounts, it seemed that Jones had to call up the Oilers himself to remind him that he was still on the team so they could grant him his release. So that's the first crazy thing. If the Oilers simply called up Jones, or even done as little as return Jones's phone calls, we're looking at his career extremely differently. However, after Jones became a free agent, he called up Wellington Mara to see if the Giants were still interested in his services, seeing as they drafted him, to which the Giants invited him to join the team. So this is where the legend of Homer Jones really happens, right? The Giants recognize his talent as a wide receiver, don't play him out of position like Houston did, and everything is good in the world. Well, not quite. Because the New York Giants, when they signed Jones, just like the Oilers, had him penciled in as a running back. And as much as Jones wanted a shot in the NFL, he saw what the Giants' situation was when it came to their offensive line, and wanted no part of being a running back. The Giants' offensive line was, in a word, abysmal. If you want to know one of the main reasons why the Giants went 2-10-2 in 1964, finishing with the worst record in football, it was partly because the offensive line couldn't block anyone. Left tackle Rosie Brown, who was a great player, was at the twilight of his career and was not the man that he once was. The 1964 season was the first time since 1955 that he did not receive any first-team or second-team All-Pro nominations from the Associated Press. Their right tackle was a 7th-round rookie named Roger Anderson, who was so bad that he switched positions after the season to the defensive side of the ball. And the interior was nothing to write home about either. When you put it all together, not only did the Giants get sacked 45 times over 14 games, or over 3 times per game, but they only picked up 3.2 yards per carry, which was not just the worst total in the league, but was nearly a full yard under the league average. Jones did not like getting hit, and he wanted no part in being a running back on this team that had no offensive line to work with. Said Jones later on, "We didn't have much blocking, to say the least, on our offensive line. I decided I didn't want to be running straight into what quarterback Y.A. Tittle was fleeing for his life from." So you would think that because of this, that Jones wouldn't have lasted another day on the team, right? If this was any other situation, his career would be done. He got cut by one team and probably should have been cut from another team due to insubordination, especially since he was a 20th round pick. And again, if the Giants' offensive line was even slightly better, Jones might not bring this up, and we're talking about him as a running back. However, this is where another crazy circumstance comes into the equation. Because do you want to know, when Jones rebelled against head coach Allie Sherman and said how he didn't want to play running back, how many wide receivers the Giants had on their team in camp? 1. Seriously, they had one wideout. Because the Giants were absolutely dreadful at roster management, and because head coach Allie Sherman had no idea what he was doing, the Giants only had one wideout on their team. Wide receivers coach, or ends coach, Ken Cavanaugh, was essentially a private tutor by this point, as Bobby Crispino was the only player at wide receiver who showed up to camp. Said line coach Ed Coleman on the situation, "I feel rather ridiculous making out my work schedules each day. Imagine that one coach for one end. What a racket that Ken Cavanaugh has. He's in semi-retirement." So when the Giants needed another wide receiver because they flat out didn't have a second, especially since backfield coach Harry Wright was having trouble giving all of his running backs reps because of how many there were, the Giants decided to move Homer Jones from running back to wide receiver, officially changing his position. Said Wright, "Jones may get another shot at running back a little later on, but for the time being, he'll make both Cavanaugh and myself a lot happier staying on the flank." So before going any further, let's recap everything that had to happen just for Homer Jones to become a wide receiver. He started his career out as a running back for the Oilers, but the Oilers found something wrong with his knee that was easily fixable with a minor surgery, and they refused to call him or return any of his calls, essentially doing the 1960s equivalent of ghosting someone. If that doesn't happen, Jones's career looks dramatically different. Then he went to the Giants and complained about playing running back because their offensive line was so terrible. If the offensive line was just a hair better, Jones's career looks drastically different. And then the Giants only had one receiver on their roster at training camp, necessitating a switch to another position. If the Giants had the appropriate number of receivers on their team and knew how to manage a roster, Jones's career looks drastically different. Basically, multiple teams had to be completely incompetent for Jones to shine at wide receiver and become a player at that position. And because of that, well, history was made. Because the Oilers didn't return his calls, because the Giants had no offensive line to speak of, and because the Giants had no wideouts on the roster except for one, Homer Jones, through an absolutely bizarre chain of events that could not happen today, became a superstar wide receiver that changed the game forever. Heck, even though the game has changed so much today in favor of the passer, you can make the legitimate argument that the New York Giants have not found a better receiver than Homer Jones. He might be the best receiver in franchise history. Only 5 other players rank above Jones in franchise history in receiving yards. 3 of those, in Frank Gifford, Tiki Barber, and Joe Morrison, were primarily running backs. One of them was Amani Toomer, who was exceptional, but was never one of the top receivers in football like Homer Jones was. And the other was Odell Beckham Jr., who might truly be the only player that has a case in terms of how good they were at their peak. Homer Jones truly was a Giants legend in every sense of the word, and there's a reason why he's still so fondly remembered today, even though he last played more than half a century ago, and even though the Giants throughout most of his career in the late 60s were really, really bad. Should his great career have happened? Absolutely not. Again, with even a shred of competence by either of the 2 organizations he started out with, we're not talking about Homer Jones. He's a complete afterthought. However, we're all glad that his career did happen, because he truly changed the game forever. Rest in peace to an absolute legend. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.